Today, our topic is ancient Rome. The Etruscans and Greeks were instrumental in shaping the arts of the Romans. Talking about Rome, you have to talk about the Etruscans. They lived in the area of Tuscany, and this is how it got its name. The Etruscans flourished between the 8th and 1st centuries BC and were famous for being religious, for their metalworking, their love of music and banquets, and the independence they allowed their women. Mining and commerce of metals was common and led to the expansion of the Etruscan influence in the Italian peninsula. The Etruscans brought influences from the Orient and Greece. They were the predominant culture before the rise of the Roman Empire. The Romans, with their great military strength and unity, overcame the different peoples of Italy one by one, but they learned many things from each. Often we see these images here on the screen and we think of Rome, but it was really the Etruscan influence over the Romans. The concept of the arch that the Romans used was really first done by the Etruscans, and the Etruscans used the arch in limited ways because it did not fit with the classic architecture that existed or was being built at the time. After the Romans took over the Etruscans, they learned their techniques for building and incorporated the arch into the Roman architectural scheme. The height of Roman rule is known as the Pax Romana. Pax Romana actually means Roman peace, and from 30 BC until about 180 AD, Rome was very peaceful and prosperous. This 200-year period of peace and stability allowed the Roman Empire to achieve new heights in technology, agriculture, science, and the arts. The Roman Empire was very civilized during this time, and life was generally comfortable and good. During this time, the area of Rome rule expanded by about 2 million square miles. Women had many rights, more if they were higher in society, including they were able to own property, make their own wills, take advantage of education, attend public functions, and had an influence in politics. Family life was very important to the Romans, and so women were highly respected. The end of the Pax Romana is marked by the death of Marcus Aurelius. Looking at their spatial relationships, they were influenced by the Hellenistic times and Greek arts. Romans imported Greek scholars and craftsmen who directly influenced interior architecture and building decoration. Romans often had large amounts of open space in their interior of their public buildings, and their private homes were much more confined. Roman floor plans were similar to the Greeks in that they were both oriented inward. They were planned around the atrium or created in a megaron style, and they used light as an important design element. Here you can see the domus. The domus is a single-family house occupied by the upper class and was found in most major cities in Roman territories. The word domestic actually originates from the domus. The domus was usually flush with the street. It had shops on both sides of the doorway and the entry into the house from the street. Many parts of the domus include the vestibulum, which was an entryway that was long, narrow, and covered. The fauces, which was a darkened area with a low ceiling directly behind the vestibule. The atrium, which was the main reception area that had lots of natural light, and light and water would come in from the compluvium, or the ceiling, and water was caught in the impluvium. The tablinum, which was basically like a home office, was the space between the atrium and peristyle, and the peristyle was a columned courtyard where the altars and statues to the gods were placed. The triclina which was basically like their dining rooms, had 3 couches, each placed in geometric patterns. And then they had the cubiculums, which were their bedrooms. Roman art and architecture is a blending of Greek and Roman elements. In art, Rome copied many Greek statues, but also produced a more realistic style of portrait art instead of the idealized forms created by the Greeks. All men did not look like their Greek statues, but that was considered their ideal. In architecture, Rome used Greek columns but modified them to be more elaborate, as well as using the arch and dome quite extensively, something the Greeks did not do. An example of Roman use of arches and domes can be seen here in the Pantheon. The Pantheon is a circular building with a portico and huge Corinthian columns. The large concrete dome on top has an oculus, or an opening, and the height and length of the dome are equal. Both are 142 feet. After more than 2,000 years, this is still the world's largest unreinforced concrete dome. The temple was built to honor all the Olympian gods. The name Pantheon is Greek and actually means of all the gods. Here you can see what is now the remains of the city of Pompeii. The city of Pompeii was a natural trading site that grew into a substantial city located in Rome. The sudden eruption of the volcano Vesuvius in 79 AD toppled many structures and covered the city in over 20 feet of cinder and ash. It happened so fast that entire buildings and their contents were preserved intact below layers of pumice and volcanic ash. For reasons not fully known, Pompeii was left essentially undisturbed until 1600, when workers digging a canal to divert the Sarno River came upon ruins of the ancient buildings. And also in this slide, you can see basically the roadway and center stones in the road. What would happen is when it would rain, water would come flooding through the city and flow down the streets, and they would use these central stones as crossing points to get from one side to the other. In Pompeii, there are many well-preserved examples of the traditional single-family house, the domus, with its characteristic arrangements of rooms around a central atrium. In densely populated Ostia, only the very wealthy could afford a domus. By the end of the 1st century BC, overpopulated city gave rise to the insulae, or apartments. Here, the middle and lower class lived in 3 to 6 story tenement buildings. 6 to 8 apartment blocks could occupy one insulae and were designed around an open courtyard. The ground floor of the insulae frequently housed commercial shops, and these apartments outnumbered the domus 25 to 1 and remained the typical housing type until the end of the empire. Ancient Rome is famous for its water and wastewater systems. They were first to create a type of sewer system. Rome's water supply system was one of the marvels of the ancient world. Have you ever heard of the aqueducts? Much is known and has been written about Rome's water supply. Much less has been made of the impact that the water and wastewater system had on Rome's lifestyle. Most of Rome's dwellings were not supplied well with heat, light, and water. The sanitary arrangements, if judged by modern standards, were inadequate. The typical Roman must have lived almost entirely outside of his tenement house, in the streets, shops, latrines, baths, and arenas of the city. The domus mainly served as a place to sleep and store possessions. Romans at first turned to the Tiber River, local springs, and shallow wells for their drinking water. But water obtained from these sources became polluted and inadequate for the city's growing population. Because of this, the aqueduct was built. The first aqueduct was finished around the year 312 BC. The combined lengths of all the aqueducts of Rome equal over 500 miles. Only 29 miles are above ground. Building underground allowed them to keep water free from diseases. The arches we often see in aqueducts help keep the pitch for flowing water. The aqueducts are powered entirely by gravity. This is an example of their amazing intellect, creative thinking, and manpower. All of this was created without modern technology. Roman architecture excelled because of the use of concrete, the arch, the vault, and the dome. Important buildings like the Basilica, the Colosseum, the Pantheon, public baths and theaters, and triumphal arches and columns like Trajan's Column. The Roman style emphasized grandeur, magnificence, size, and solidity. The Colosseum held games and ceremonies that lasted 100 days. During this time, more than 5,000 wild animals were put to death as part of their entertainment. Looking at the Colosseum then, beside the amphitheater stood the Colossus of Nero, which was a giant statue of gilt bronze. It stood 30 meters high. It was a representation of their sun god. Incorporating these statues implies the influence of the Greeks. And you can also see what remains today of their magnificent Colosseum. Inside the Colosseum consisted of an arena with a wooden floor covered in sand. The stands were subdivided into 3 sections of steps, then topped with a loggia, that was the 4th section for standing citizens. Each section was reserved based on the class of citizen. The Colosseum could hold 70,000 people. The Pantheon is a circular building with a portico in the front. The portico consists of 3 sets of huge granite Corinthian columns, 8 in the first row and 2 rows of 4 behind. Under a pediment that opens into the rotunda, under a coffered concrete dome with a central opening, the oculus, which is also known as the Great Eye, open to the sky. The coffered interior dome has been a model for many similar structures, and the great painter Raphael is buried here, along with kings Vittorio Emanuele II and Umberto I. Romans used the Greek building ideas such as the post and lintel and columns, but the Romans took the concept further and changed it by using it for more theatrical or decorative purposes, unlike the Greeks, who used them only for form and structure. The Romans used many materials to create decorative techniques. They used terracotta, brick, and stone for major structures. Concrete is responsible for the increase in decoration in their interior spaces, and stucco work was dominant in Roman interiors. It was used to simulate architectural features, to create architectural enrichment, like creating lyres, cupids, and swans. It was used for decorative reliefs applied to ceilings and walls, and was also a foundation for wall paintings. Lime plaster was used to create perspective paint on wet plaster, which we know as fresco. Tesserae, which are small pieces of various materials set in mortar to make mosaics. Tessellatum, which are floor mosaics. And opus massivum, which are wall mosaics. Their walls were often treated with paint or could incorporate mosaics or plaster. There were 4 stages of Roman interior wall decoration. The first is incrustation, or also known as masonry style. Walls were treated as solid with an emphasis on stucco. It was divided into 3 zones, the dado, the middle, and the upper, and was painted to imitate stone or marble. And stone or marble was typically seen in wealthy homes, so basically this style was to create the illusion of wealth, and it accentuated the flatness of the walls. The second type is architectural, or also known as the illusionistic style, and it created illusions with paint and perspective rendering. Three-dimensional paintings were seen. The trompe-l'oeil effect, which means to fool the eye or to make something two-dimensional seem three-dimensional. Columns would be painted on the wall to appear as if they were real, and instead of stone they painted landscapes that would portray an open window to an outdoor setting. The third style is ornate, or also known as the ornamental style, and there was an emphasis on ornamental representation in architecture. Early figurative paintings had soft colors, no strong accents, and clearly drawn figures with an open space around them. Later during this period, the spaces were filled with action. The wall was still divided into three sections, but at the top of the dado or chair rail, an additional horizontal band had been painted with Egyptian motifs. They would also paint frames around these images. And the fourth style is the intricate, and these compositions emphasize space, light, and airy scenes like the backdrop you would see in a theater production. This had greater attention to three-dimensional rendering of the human body, creating more realism. The walls were still divided into three sections, but here the dado was now divided into three horizontal bands, and these bands were divided into segments for painting. Stucco moldings were used, and the frieze might have 5 figures, beasts, or flowers molded to it. There was a clear division between the ceiling and wall, which was enhanced with a stucco cornice molding crowning the wall, hence crown molding. Ceilings were painted as well, using a variety of geometric formats and alternating between curvilinear interlace or geometric patterns, or they could also be carved out of concrete. Floors, finished in mosaic tiles, were simpler in design given the coarse nature of the material. Lozenges, squares, or octagons were often created. On occasion you may see a representational design like the duck. Evidence from reliefs, wall paintings, sarcophagi, and marble and bronze parts increases our knowledge of Roman furniture. Romans relied heavily on the Greek prototypes for their inspiration, although Roman furniture is more ornate. Romans used wood, metal, and stone to make their furniture, and bronze was the most widely used metal. To join furniture, Romans used tenons, dowels, nails, and glue, and their methods of ornamentation were carving, inlay, veneer, painting, plating, and turning. Thrones, chairs, couches, and stools were their most common pieces of furniture. The sella curulus was a stool that symbolized honor and higher authority. This was used for the high magistrates or by the emperor and was made mostly of bronze. Wickerwork chairs were also created with high rounded backs. Other chairs were based upon the Greek klizmos chair, but the Romans' version was heavier. The most common stool was the double reverse curve or X form, seen here. The lectus, or couch, or bed, was perhaps the most important item of Roman furniture. It was used for sleeping, sitting, relaxing, and eating. In some of the bedrooms of Pompeii, the frames were missing. When it was built like this, the mattress was laid on a support built up from the floor. The couches, used as sleeping beds, seem to have been larger than those used for sofas, and they were so high that stools or even steps were necessary to reach them. As a sofa, the Roman lectus was used in libraries for reading and writing. Often, the students would support himself on his left arm and would hold a book or writing with his right hand. In Roman dining rooms, the lectus had a permanent place. Often they were set in an arrangement of 3 set at right angles. Here you can see a sketch of a Roman leader. The leader consists of an ordinary couch where 4 posts carrying an arched canopy and a pair of poles have been added. Above the canopy is a rod where curtains were fastened by rings. The occupant could hide himself from view by drawing these curtains closed. It was carried by slaves, and the leader was used more often in the city by women. But it was commonly used in the country and on long journeys by the wealthy, and luxurious leaders became fashionable in the empire. Romans made transportable tables that had trestle supports, tripods, and single central supports. The trestle table was used by the Greeks and Romans, but more often by the Romans. The heads of swan, horses, lions, ducks, elephants were often used to decorate the fulcra. And here you can see all the glory that once was the typical view in the streets of ancient Rome. Today, little is left of their magnificence. That concludes our brief history of ancient Rome. Next time we'll be talking about the Middle Ages.